Everything hinges on identity. It is the compass of our faith that aligns with the Holy Spirit to fulfill the Father's will, wrapped up in everything hinges on identity. It is the compass of our faith that aligns with the Holy Spirit to fulfill the Father's will. Wrapped up in identity is who we are, the purpose of our being, and every God-breathed promise that manifests as our success. Hello, I'm LaTisha Styles, and I'm the author of Redefining Success, 8 Tools that I use to develop a growth mindset. In this amazing book, not only will I share with you 8 tools that I use for a growth mindset, but I'll also share the applicable principles based on God's word that you can easily implement in your life journey. So no matter where you are and no matter where you see yourself in the future, this book will be a tool that you need for your toolbox. Don't wait, get it today, and it can be found on Amazon by simply searching Redefining Success, 8 Tools that I use for a growth mindset. Take care. Hey, how you doing?
Glad to be here. I'm excited, feeling good.
Yes, awesome. I have been anticipating this conversation for the last couple of weeks. And so we won't hesitate. I'll do all of my little necessities and get them out of the way so we can jump right in and continue our conversation on subconscious blocks. And so listen, guys, those of you that are joining us live across Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn, thank you so much for joining us for another great episode of LaQuita's Toolbox Live. I am your host, LaTisha Styles, and I'm just excited to have a continuation of a podcast conversation from a couple of weeks ago with my amazing guest, Miss LaTisha Styles. And so what I want to do right now is just take a moment and thank our sponsors of today's episode, and our sponsors are Covenant Press. They are a faith-based Christian apparel and accessory shop where we as believers are able to shop online for clothing, items, and accessories that allow us to wear the message of the love of Jesus Christ. So you want to check them out at www.covenant-press.com. Again, that's www.covenant-press.com. They always have some amazing specials available. So you don't want to close out too quickly on those pop-ups. Grab those codes and put them in at the checkout to receive some amazing discounts and promotions while you're shopping. So listen, guys, thank you again for tuning in. And let's take this time to like, share, and subscribe. If you're new to the YouTube channel, please hit that subscribe button across our other social media platforms. Let's go ahead and share this conversation and get it out to as many people as possible. But without further ado, Miss LaTisha, take a moment, please, for those that might not know you, to let us know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So my name is LaTisha Styles. I am a marketing consultant. I am founder and CEO of You'veGotClients.com, where we help coaches create and fill their coaching programs with high quality clients. I have been on a journey, an entrepreneurial journey from the very start. Starting my first online business, failed, back and forth from, quitting a job, going back to a job, and really trying to make it work. And that's part of the reason that I'm so adamant about this conversation, about identifying subconscious blocks, breaking subconscious blocks, because, I wouldn't be where I am today with a business that I think is semi-successful. I have put myself on payroll. I have a team of contractors, people that I'm working with. And I wouldn't have been able to do this unless I had taken that time to go through and figure out what are the things that are holding me back? How can I rework those things? How can I get my brain to work with me instead of working against me and self-sabotaging, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part of the reason why, like I said, I'm so adamant about this topic and in support of it. So I'm excited to chat about it today.
Awesome, awesome. And you said some great things there. And for you guys that may have missed that podcast episode, don't worry, I'm gonna put the link in the comments so you can go back and catch that podcast episode. But in the podcast and today we're really gonna dig into, what are subconscious blocks. LaTisha's gonna talk to us about 7 common subconscious blocks and some tips that we can use to get over them, because you said something really powerful, like whether you're following your favorite mentor or just looking for ways to make your business successful, sometimes we fall into the trap of always purchasing or trying new systems, new frameworks, or whatever the cliche is, when that might not even be the problem. Not to say that it's not always the problem, but oftentimes the way we think or overthink could be our biggest problem to being able to move forward. And talk to us about how can we identify those 7 most common subconscious blocks.
Yeah, I always say that there are 2 levels. Anytime I'm working with the client, there's the surface level, and then there's what's beneath the surface. So there's the root and the fruit, or the fruit and the root, right? So the root is what's beneath the surface, and that's essentially what we're trying to work on when we talk about subconscious blocks. And then there's the fruit, which is what has come as a result of what we've been working on. And so, a lot of times people try to only focus on the fruit, only focus on the practical. They might say something like, well, I'm not getting enough clients, therefore I must not have the right emails or funnel. I'm not getting any speaking engagements, therefore I might not have the right presentation. And those looking at those things is similar to a doctor only looking at your symptoms and then only diagnosing based on the symptoms and only providing you with a solution based on the symptoms instead of what's under the surface or the underlying problem. If someone went to a doctor and they noticed that you were, coughing, and they said, oh, just take this Halls for your cough, instead of thinking, okay, well, what's the problem? Why are you coughing? What's causing that? You probably wouldn't continue going to that provider. And so that's essentially what we need to look at. We know that there are symptoms that can alert us to the fact that there is an issue, but we also need to think about, okay, so then, what's deeper? So, as I started going through this process and working with clients, I realized that there were very common subconscious blocks that kept coming up over and over and over again. And I did my best to, write as many of them as I could. And eventually I ended up with 7, because they all aligned into these typical buckets. So if you've never heard of the 7 most common subconscious blocks before, they are, I'll just list them out quickly and then I'll go back through and we can talk more about them. Block number 1 is self-sabotage. Block number 2 is imposter syndrome. Block number 3, start, stop. Block number 4, self-doubt. Block number 5, fear of greatness. Block number 6, fear of failure. And block number 7, addiction to struggle. And so each of these, they don't necessarily exist in a silo. You may have experienced 1, 2, 3, all of them. And it's important to understand that generally there's one that's the one that plagues you the most. And so when you see these things come up, the key to understand is that you never really eliminate a subconscious block. You only ever shift it. And I think we talked about this before.
We did.
Where as you're progressing in your life and in your experience, you're essentially going in an upward spiral. And so as you're progressing and you're leveling up, a lot of people think that it's like a ladder or a stair step where you step up and then you're done with everything that came before, but that's not necessarily the case. Typically what happens is we're progressing and we're leveling up, and it's like a spiral. And so as we come back around to, this level, we come back around to this level. Every time we come here, we're going to experience that same or similar version of that subconscious block. It's going to feel a little bit different. You'll be better equipped to deal with it at every level, but you tend to get plagued by the same one over and over again. So go ahead.
So with that, we've identified it, and we understand that we could struggle with one, two, or all of them. But what I hear you saying here, the key is identifying the one or the ones that you struggle with, and it's kind of like where I've heard an addicts say that, that desire never goes away. They've just learned how to overcome it, manage it, and keep it at bay.
Exactly.
But you can't learn how to manage it and keep it at bay if I don't first acknowledge that it exists. And so I think that's like going to be one of the biggest points in the conversation today is it's nothing wrong with acknowledging that these things exist in your life, because at that point, then we can actively begin to work to change it.
Exactly. Once you recognize it, once you acknowledge it, then you can start taking those steps to start shifting them. And so I like using the word shift subconscious block rather than break subconscious block. But honestly, it doesn't really matter the word that you use. It's important to understand that even though you do shift it, or even though you feel like you've gotten rid of it, you'll see it at another level. And you need to be prepared when you do see it at that next level, because when you're at that next level, it won't necessarily look exactly the same. For example, if you struggle with the addiction to struggle subconscious block, when you first experienced it, it might have been something that really caused you to really stop what you were doing, self-sabotage the work that you were doing, and really just hold on to the struggle because you were addicted to it. Then at the next level, the next time you see it, it might be in another area of your life. It might be like a smaller thing where you're not quite sure, like, oh, is this struggle or is this just me wanting to do something different, even though I happen to be struggling, in this new thing. So it's like you gotta be able to identify them.
So let's talk about addiction to struggle, because there might be some people on here that said, why in the world would someone be addicted to struggle? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones, clearly, because it's my main subconscious block, which is addiction to struggle. And it is defined as an unwillingness to release the status quo of the struggle. And that means that there's something that feels good about the struggle. There's something that feels good about having that sense of living on the edge, or not fully accomplishing what you want to accomplish, but just feeling like, oh, there's always something I got to reach towards. There's something I got to break through. I got to get there. I'm always struggling. And that one in particular could cause you to then turn to some of those other subconscious blocks. One of the main secondary ones for addiction to struggle is self-sabotage, where you'll sabotage the good efforts that you've already put out there because there's something about the struggle that feels good. And so some ways that you can recognize if this is plaguing you is, let's say, for example, you have a certain amount of debt. Like for some reason, you're like, oh, I'm trying to get rid of this debt. I got like $8,000 worth of debt. I'm trying to get rid of it. You happen to pay off that debt on that card or whatever. But then suddenly you check the numbers and somehow you owe $3,000 here, $4,000 here, another $1,000 here. Somehow you still owe $8,000. It's just no longer on that credit card, but it's just shifted. It's just moved to another spot. And meanwhile, you're like, what's going on? I said that I'm done with debt. I'm so over it. I paid this off. Why do I still owe this on this side? And I use that example because that was the exact example for me. I had, at one point I had $65,000 of student loan debt. And then I was working on paying that down. And I think I got it down to a point where it was like, $20,000. But then I had $40,000 of business debt. And so it was like, by the time we added it all up, I was like, I still have $65,000 of debt. Like, why is this still the issue? And it's because there was something deep down inside of me that I still wanted to hold on to that. It still felt good to feel like, oh, I've got this thing to overcome and to accomplish. I'm happy to say that I finally have leveled up at that point and gotten rid of the student loan debt and gotten rid of the business debt. But that plagued me for several years. And it wasn't until I identified it that I was like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. it's time for me to release this. It's okay to have money that's just sitting in the bank for no other reason than it's just sitting in the bank. And it's one of the ways that we kind of get through this is to create what I like to call a power playlist. And that's really where you think of songs that really empower you, where you feel good and you can take on that message and kind of like cloak yourself in that message. Like, okay, this is who I am. I am, I am strong. I am powerful, whatever it is. There's certain songs that kind of get you hype and get you in a good vibe. And as you're listening to those songs and feeling that music and that emotion, make those statements, those power statements, whatever it is that you're working to overcome, those power statements, like, I keep a full bank account, like whatever the statement is that combats what you're wanting to work on. That's how you work on that.
Wow, that's real good. Listen, guys, I hope you guys have had something to write with and write on through this live, because LaTisha has given us some great information. And so far we've covered why it's important to identify subconscious blocks, understanding that, the subconscious blocks may be something that remains with us, but we learn how to overcome them, manage them, and keep them at bay. We've talked about, she just gave us a great tool with having a power playlist, amazing tool right there. And so you want to make sure that throughout the course of this conversation, get in the comment section, let us know your thoughts, add some value to this conversation. We're open to your questions, your thoughts, your ideas. Let us hear from you. And again, those of you that are joining us now and that will watch on the replay, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons, and so we can get this message out to as many people as possible. And we've been talking so far, and we're covered addiction to struggle, and how we can even connect with how one subconscious block that we have can actually connect to different types of subconscious blocks. And we've looked at the addiction to struggle and how it can also connect with self-sabotage, which happens to be one of mine, ones that I have to work very hard to make sure that I recognize it, because sometimes it shields itself under, oh, this is just a common sense good decision. And we have to recognize that that they can show up in many different ways, and we hold on to it because it's a safety net. It makes us feel safe and comfortable, and not being able to recognize that it's something that's actually holding us back and preventing us from being able to move forward. And even when you were talking about the addiction to struggle, one of the things that came to mind is when I was studying to get my certification with the John Maxwell team, I studied the DISC personality. And one of the bits in the area of a struggle that a particular personality type would struggle with, like the D for the dominant personality, because they have that need to fix and do all of the time, sometimes that particular personality can kind of not on purpose break stuff just so they can have something to fix. And so that brought to mind is, do certain personality types struggle with particular subconscious blocks?
Well, I believe a personality type is all based on what's inside of your brain, right? We have to answer those questions that define what our personality type is. So we are we're already giving our personality type to that quiz, if that makes sense. So like when we answer those questions, we're specifically putting out, hey, these are our subconscious blocks. So yeah, I would agree that, certain personality types likely have or exhibit certain functions and features of certain subconscious blocks. Like if you tend to be a perfectionist, or someone who feels like, it's always got to get done, it's got to get done the right way, then you're probably also struggling with the start-stop block, where you start something, then you stop it because it's like, it's not perfect, I'll come back to it. And then you're like starting something else. And so I feel like there's a lot of areas where, we recognize, a lot of times we see it, like, for those of you who are watching, like, you probably see it in yourself, like, oh, I'm constantly doing this. I didn't even realize that was a subconscious block. I thought it was just my personality. And the answer is, it is your personality, but it's also something that you can shift and work with and learn to manage, so that when it does come around, you recognize it and you say, oh, that's my addiction to struggle coming back up again. So that therefore I need to go this way instead of going that way, which is what I wanted to do initially, because that's leading me back towards the struggle. I actually don't want to do that. So I'm going to head this way instead.
That's good. So when the person has identified that in their normal response is to make a sharp left, making that sharp right instead of that sharp left could be a point of big struggle. What are some of the things that we can do to, I guess, discipline ourselves? We've recognized it, we've acknowledged it. Now I got to take some action to change it. Like, what are some things we can do to help ourselves take action to change it?
Well, each one has its own protocol, essentially. So, for example, if you're facing self-sabotage and you would normally sabotage a project or something that's happening, typically that's a belief, underlying belief that I don't deserve it or it never works out for me. So there's an underlying belief there that we have to work on. And so the exercise there is to write out reasons that you deserve to reach this particular goal, or even reasons that you love yourself. So it's working on that self-worth. Another example is if you have that fear of greatness, where you are afraid of the consequences of massive success, then you want to think of somebody you admire and respect who has success, and write out all the reasons out why you admire and respect them. And also why you're never going to settle again, like why greatness is in your best interest. And then as you're writing those things out, the fear will start to minimize and you'll start to go for those bigger things. And I find that this happens a lot when we recognize that we have greatness in us. And so we set big goals, and then we go after those big goals, and then they don't necessarily happen as fast as we want them to, or they might not happen right away. And so then what happens is we shrink because we're scared of that emotion that comes with failure, the emotion of, wow, I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. I didn't succeed. And therefore, maybe I'm not as great as what I thought I was. And so in that instance, when you basically write out those characteristics of that person that you like, admire, and respect, what you're doing is you're recognizing that that person is not so dissimilar from you, because the only reason you can see those characteristics is because you have them. You can't recognize something that you can't define. So you understand it because you have it inside of you. You have greatness in you. So it's important to just keep moving forward. When you recognize, okay, I'm just kind of scared, and that's why I'm playing small. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep pushing for it, whether it happens or not today, tomorrow, in a year, I don't care. I'm still going to continue to push forward towards it.
I love that. I think I heard you use that as an example. I can't remember which one of your videos I was watching, but the things that we love and admire and respect about the people who are either our current active mentors in our life, or we just, trying to role model after them. In that conversation, you were saying that, I think you were in a conference or something, and the person that was leading said those things are in the inside of you as well. And that's why. So not only we recognize the greatness that's inside of us in other people, but also the struggle points that we can recognize inside of others. Well, we can recognize it because we've lived that experience.
And usually the thing that you're called to coach people on, or the thing you're called to help people with, is the main problem that you have as well, thing that you're working on for yourself. So it's important to understand that that is also okay. A lot of times people feel a sense of imposter syndrome because they might say something like, well, I'm trying to help women do XYZ, but I still feel like I'm not quite where I want to be there yet.
Yes.
And I see this a lot. And my response is, number one, you only need to be a couple of steps ahead of the person that you're looking to help. And two, like, you're never done. You're always going to have a personal development that you're going on. You're on a journey. You're not on okay, I'm starting, then I'm finished, right?
Right.
And then the final thing I always say is surgeons never operate on themselves. There's a reason that even if you're top cardiothoracic surgeon, you're not going to, we've been watching Grey's Anatomy, which is why I popped in with that word. Even if you're a top surgeon, like, you're still not going to operate on yourself. You still have to call in the next best surgeon or someone to come and operate on you. So if you're teaching marketing, you can have a marketing mentor. If you're teaching how to get a great relationship, you can also have a mentor that's helping you with getting a great relationship. If you're teaching health and fitness, you can also have a fitness coach. It's okay to have somebody that you're working with that's going to help you move you to that next level. The thing to understand is that, once again, you as someone who's good at what you do, it's important for you to also find people who are good at what they do so they can help and support you.
That's real good. I love you brought that you brought that up, because that self imposter syndrome is one that I struggle with. But as you were saying, I think that, like, just from a spiritual perspective, we struggle with it because we're called to help people. Mm-hmm. And if we stay stuck in the struggle, we'll never help the people that we're supposed to help. And like you said, you only have to be a few steps ahead of that person, because if that person is at A and I'm at E, I can help them get to E, mm-hmm. right? And if I have someone that's helping me that's already on W, then I will always be able to help that person, because I have somebody. It's like, a chain. We're all pulling each other forward, mm-hmm. Just not devaluing who we are and the strengths that we have. And so,
there's one more thing that I'll say on that, especially in this comment where, you don't have to be more than a few steps ahead. I will say that often it's helpful if you're only a few steps ahead. What happens is, the further ahead, the further along someone is, the more they tend to forget the little things that they did or didn't do, what actually helped them, what steps they took. And they forget those things and they overlook it. And meanwhile, you're a beginner trying to work with someone who's, 15 steps ahead of you, and they say, do this. And you're like, well, I don't even know how to do that. Right. Like, I don't even know how to use Canva. And they're like, okay, just create a lead magnet. And you're like, well, wait, like,
how do I do that?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that wherever you are, if you turn around right immediately and just start teaching in a workshop or whatever it is, teaching what you know and what you understand, you're going to be able to be a lot more nuanced and share the details. And it's also going to help you learn as well. You're going to be able to do that better than someone who's, has a huge, massive audience and is 25 steps ahead.
I like that. I really like that, because it still speaks to, like what you were saying, the importance of understanding there's nothing wrong with having a mentor in your area. Like, though my mentor is someone who loves to impact the lives of women from the standpoint of helping them understand their identity. But where she is versus where my ideal client is in two different spaces. And so though I'm her ideal client, my client might not be her ideal client, because they haven't gotten to where I am so that she can bring them up to that next level. And so we all have value. We all have value. We all have worth. And we have to learn how to be okay and impact the people that we're called to impact. And again, not devaluing who we are. And no, you're not an imposter where you are. You're right where you're supposed to be, helping the people that you're supposed to help.
Exactly.
Awesome. And so we've looked at imposter syndrome. We've looked at addiction to struggle. I could not get it out. We looked at self-sabotage as well. And so we have 4 more. What is the next one? If I can talk today, my goodness. The next block that we want to look at.
Yeah, I think we actually talked through fear of greatness. We talked a little bit about start, stop, and we touched on imposter syndrome also. So the last one is fear of failure, which a lot of people tend to feel. And it's a very common one. And it's just being afraid of the consequences of failure. And this is something that I've been doing this exercise, I think, since I was a kid. And the reason is I've always been someone that I've always been a little bit independent. I've always was, I've always the one where my mom had to call me and say, hey, like, don't do that. I always push the boundaries a little bit. So this exercise is one that I've been doing since I was a kid, which is just like, what if everything goes wrong? Like, what if you fail? What happens? Like, okay, if that happens, then what happens? Then what happens? Then what happens? And so it's really just looking at what are the actual consequences of failure. Sometimes we have it as this like nebulous thing that's just out there. So we need to actually look at what are the consequences of failure. And if that happens, what actually, like, what's the end of it? And generally my ending statement was always, I'm not going to die and I'm not going to jail. So therefore it's okay. I'll do it. Right. I'll move forward. And that's essentially how I move forward with business stuff at this point as well. If there's something I'm scared to do, I'm like, wow, this is like a really big step for me. I'm like, okay, is illegal and ethical, obviously. But then the ending statement is, all right, well, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to go to jail. No one's going to die. No one's going to go to jail. Like, that's the worst that could happen, right? Have our freedom taken away in one of two ways, right? So once you determine that and you actually look at it, you can actually define what does failure actually mean. And once you actually define it, you'll probably recognize that it's not as bad as what you think it was.
So the exercise sounds like it helps us to reframe or reshape what our definition of failure is.
Yeah, I would say that it helps you to clarify and define your definition of failure, because failure can be this nebulous thing where we're not sure what it is. We're just scared to fail. It's like, well, what does failure really mean? What happens if you fail? And once you define it, then you're able to look at it and say, oh, that's actually not that scary. Because now you can create what's called a contingency plan. That's how businesses work. You create a contingency plan. Okay, if this happens, then contingent based on that happening, then I might do this. I might take this action. I might shift things that way.
That's good. Because as you were saying that, the question that you ask yourself, am I going to die? I'm going to go to jail. Those kind of things. Failure, the quote that's coming to mind was, failure is not fatal and failure is not final. Those are kind of like the two things that would be pretty fatal and pretty final.
Yep.
So if it's not going to get me in either of those two places, then the what ifs to come up with the contingency plans are things that I can live with and live through. And at the end of the day, you really can't control any of it anyway. So
exactly,
what is it, that's going to cause you to continue to push forward towards that? And so, I've heard you talk about a journal that you have. How can that journal help us journal our way through recognizing these blocks and overcoming these blocks?
Yeah, and I wish I had it in front of me. Actually, it's right here. Let me just go grab it real quick.
Okay.
I feel a little unprepared because normally I have it on my desk. So it's called Dream, Decide, Do. It's a manifestation goal planner. And essentially inside of the journal, we go through the 3 steps of achieving what you desire, which is dream it, right? Clarify, get clear on what you want, decide that you're going to do it. And that's when we start talking through, okay, once you decide, like, what are some of the blocks that are coming up? As soon as you make a decision, that's typically what starts happening. And then do. And at the end of it, in that section, there's like a typical traditional planner where we're writing out what are we doing each day and what would make this day a win. And so, I really designed this based on what I personally did in my personal finances, in my health and wellness and fitness. When I wanted to get on stage, do a competition, like, these were the things that I did to go through that. And so that's really the purpose of the planner, is to help you to not only identify the blocks, but the exercises, all the exercises are in there that you need in order to restructure those, shift them, and get ready for your next level.
Awesome. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I know you guys have been enjoying this great conversation, and we are wrapping it up and bringing it to an end, unfortunately. But look, get in the comment section. There are some great links there. There's some links to connect you to you'vegotclients.com, which is LaTisha's website. I'm also going to drop some links to her social media, her YouTube videos, and also to there's some links in the comment section to our episode where we're talking a bit more in detail about the 7 different subconscious blocks, most common subconscious blocks, how to identify them and some of the things that we can do to learn how to overcome them and manage them and keep them at bay, so that we can progress and move forward and to the very best versions of ourselves. And I like to thank everyone. Normally, I engage more with the comments, and I dropped the ball today, guys. I did post your comments. So what I'm going to do afterwards, I'm going to go back and then address the comments in the comment section. But we thank you so much for the engagement, and you guys have dropped some gems here, I see, within the comment section. So we appreciate you. But before we do wrap up, is there any last words or any last thoughts that you'd like to leave with the Toolbox audience today?
Yeah, sure. I will just say that the moment that you decide to go after your dream or pursue a dream, that's when all of this stuff starts coming up. So just remember that that's normal. And now you know what tools you need to use in order to start shifting those and moving through those.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. I do appreciate you being our guest today on the show, and also for being a guest on the podcast, guys. Don't miss that episode of LaQuita's Toolbox podcast. It's available on all your major podcasting platforms. And the episode is called Identifying Subconscious Blocks. Make sure you get out and listen to that. I've dropped the Apple podcast link in there. I've also dropped the link to the show from my website. But whatever your favorite podcast listening platform, you can find LaQuita's Toolbox there on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible. It's on my YouTube channel as well, Stitcher, Deezer, TuneIn, SoundCloud. So whichever one is your jam, don't worry about it. Type in LaQuita's Toolbox and you will find it. And LaTisha's episode is there called Identifying Subconscious Blocks. Guys, thank you so much for joining us for another great episode of LaQuita's Toolbox Live. I have another great guest coming up on next week, and it's going to be me and my husband. Can't wait to hear that chat. We're going to be talking about what it looks like to build a business and a brand together as a military family. So you don't want to miss that. I'm looking forward to having that conversation. You guys know that he don't really like to talk on camera, but he's going to talk next Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Set your notifications. Don't miss that episode. You guys be blessed and have a great day. Take care.